Good evening and welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for August 18th, 2022. At this time, I would like to call the meeting to order. The commissioners who are present for this evening's meeting are in City Hall and on Zoom. We also have staff from the city attorney and clerk's offices as well as the city planning department. Nobody's on Zoom, so I can skip that. During the public testimony portion of the meeting, you can come up in chambers. Please note that we'll not take questions until the public testimony portion. If you have any process questions during the meeting, please email cityclerk@meridiancity.org and they will comply or reply as quickly as possible. With that, let's begin with roll call. Madam Clerk.
Commissioner Seal,
Present.
Commissioner Wheeler,
Did you say Wheeler? Sorry. Yes, present.
Commissioner Locker. Here. Commissioner Grace.
Here.
Commissioner Yearsley,
Here.
and absent is Commissioner Grove and Stoddard.
All right, thank you very much. First item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. This evening, we have files H 2022-0045, H 2022-0022, H 2022-0039, and H 22-0055 will be open for the sole purpose of continuing to a regularly scheduled meeting. They will open only for that purpose. So if there's anybody here tonight to testify for these particular applications, we will not be taking testimony on them this evening. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, motion carries. Next item, geez, I'm going to get tongue-tied tonight. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, and we have one item on the consent agenda, which is to approve the minutes of the August 4th, 2022 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Can I get a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, motion carries. Okay, at this time, I would like to briefly explain the public hearing process. We will open each item individually and begin with the staff report. Staff will report their findings on how the item adheres to our comprehensive plan and unified development code. After staff has made their presentation, the applicant will come forward to present their case and respond to staff comments. They will have 15 minutes to do so. After the applicant has finished, we will open the floor to public testimony. Each person will be called on only once during the public testimony. The clerk will call the names individually of those who have signed up on our website or in the back to testify. You will then come to the microphones and chambers. You need to state your name and address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes to address the commission. If you have previously sent pictures or a presentation for the meeting, it will be displayed on the screen and our clerk will run the presentation. If you have established that you are speaking on behalf of a large group like an HOA where others from that group will allow you to speak on their behalf, you will have up to 10 minutes. After all those who have signed up in advance have spoken, we will invite any others who may wish to testify. If you wish to speak on the topic, you may come forward in chambers. Okay, when you are finished, if the commission does not have any questions for you, you will return to your seat in chambers and you will no longer have the ability to speak. Please remember, we will not call on you a second time. After all testimony has been heard, the applicant will give another 10 minutes, or the applicant will be given another 10 minutes to come back and respond. When the applicant is finished responding to all questions and concerns, we will close the public hearing and the commissioners will have the opportunity to discuss and hopefully be able to make final decisions or recommendations to City Council as needed. Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing item for Kingstown subdivision, file number H 2022-0045 for continuance. Can I get, and that one we need to continue it for to September 1st.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to continue file number H 2022-0045 to the date of 9/1/2022. All those in favor?
Aye.
No nays, so motion passes. Now we'll open file number H 2022-0022 for PZ Creekview Park, which needs to be continued to the date of October 6th.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to continue file number H 2022-0022 to the date of 10/6/2022. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, motion carries. Okay, we'll open up file H 2022-0039 Slate Stone subdivision, which needs to be continued to the date of 9/15.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to continue file number H 2022-0039 to the date of 9/15/2022. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, so motion carries. We'll open file number H 2022-0055 Chipotle drive-through, which needs to be continued to the date of 9/1.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to continue file H 2022-0055 to the date of 9/1/2022. All those in favor?
Aye.
No opposed, motion carries.
Good job.
Okay.
Commissioner. Good job.
All right, now we will open file number H 2022-0049 for the existing conditions report 2022 CPAT. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Commission. I'm here tonight to discuss with you the existing conditions report 2022. I have a couple of procedural slides for you and some quick information highlights. I did give you all a handout. The PowerPoint also has the same graphic. So the existing conditions report, or ECR, is one part of two that makes up the comprehensive plan. The ECR is an addendum and required to address all 17 of the state required elements in the comprehensive plan. The ECR touches on 15 of the 17 elements. The policy element is contained in the comprehensive plan, as are discussions of property rights. The ECR is referenced throughout the 2019 comprehensive plan, mostly generically, i.e. without dates, since city updates it every few years. Briefly, here's the timeline. The 2017 existing conditions report was adopted on February 20th of 2018. Most of the data here was 2016 and older. In December of 2019, the new comprehensive plan was adopted. And tonight I'm here with you for replacement of the 2017 ECR with the 2022 version. This is the last of the procedural slides. The comprehensive plan text amendment is technically just two minor changes, striking out and replacing the 2017 with 2022 in two sections. There's actually 20 references to the existing conditions report in the comprehensive plan, but most are generic without a year or referencing date-specific context that should remain. The first page, page C, which is a list of plans and studies by reference, has one of these changes. And the second is page 1.3, which references the ECR as being important to understand trends. That's all we're changing tonight. The document itself is fairly substantial in size, but in terms of the actual text amendment, that's it. So what's changed and what's new in the ECR? It has updated data, reduced text, reorganized sections, more focus on change, particularly in the demographic and economic sections. The rest of this presentation is largely quick slides. Most of these you have in your handout, and all of them are from the existing conditions report itself. I'm going to go through these quickly, but feel free to stop me if you have any questions. So this slide here isn't anything new, but you can see what's changed in just the last 2 years. The census population for Meridian in 2020 was 117,635. 2 years later, the Compass estimate, which is our regional metropolitan planning organization, estimated that as 133,470. So just in 2 years, you can see there's been quite a bit of change. The gender information is on there. It's not really, it's pretty normal. This is what population change looks like a few ways. The decade between 2010 and 2020 was our fastest growth by total population ever. Roughly 36% of the 2020 population arrived after the 2010 census count. As a preface here, all population groups are increasing by total population. However, some groups are changing as a percent of the whole more quickly. The 0 to 9 age groups have been getting increasingly smaller as a percent of the whole, while the 50 to 64 and 65 and older groups are increasing. This is reflected in other data as well, such as school attendance and employment data. This slide shows some education change. Generally, Meridian is seeing slow increases towards more education. Females have the most pronounced increase from 2019 to 2014 and from 2016 to 2020 American Community Survey data, particularly in the associate's and bachelor's degrees. Some employment and labor force data is here. Total job increases in 10 years are about 1 for every 2 people, and family wage jobs are closer to 1 for every 3.6 people. You can see the chart on the right again, another indicator of an aging population. We have fewer labor force, Meridian residents that are employed in the 30 to 54 age group and more in the 55 and older age group.
Mr. Chair,
Right ahead.
staff, can you go ahead and repeat that again, what you said about repeat what you just said again from the beginning? There was something that kind of just jogged my mind here for a second, so thought.
So total job increases over a 10-year period is 1 for every 2 people, approximately. And the family wage job increases are closer to 1 for every 3.6 people. And then the chart on the right, you can sort of see, going back to the previous slide, the changing demographics. So we have fewer labor force, Meridian workers in the age group from 30 to 54 and more in the 55 and older.
Okay, so what's considered a family wage job?
That's a good question. So all of this data is from American Community Survey data, and the range from a few years ago was, this is specific to American Community Survey, and it's a national sort of trend.
Okay.
But it's, I believe it's 1,333. Actually, you know what? I don't want to misspeak. Let me see if I can find that real quick for you.
Sorry about the extra legwork here, but I was just kind of curious what they would classify as a family wage job.
So that's, I'm glad I corrected myself. So that's 3,333 per month.
Okay, thank you.
On the left here, you can see the highest job sector employment increases, those jobs in Meridian in the last 10 years. So these aren't where, on the left isn't where Meridian residents work, it's the jobs in Meridian. The right shows the largest labor force sectors, so those jobs that Meridian residents work, but not necessarily in Meridian. The next 2 slides aren't in the handout, but they are from the ECR. They're kind of fun. This map is just shows broad patterns. What you're seeing is origin destination of employment in Meridian based on larger census tracts. So these are the jobs in Meridian and where workers travel from to get there. The wider the line, the more workers are traveling from the same census tract origin to the same census tract designation or destination. So you can see where people are coming from and where into Meridian they're going to by large census tracts. In sharp contrast, what you're seeing here is origin destination for residents in Meridian to their jobs, which aren't necessarily in Meridian. The Meridian workforce, that's the Meridian workforce. Again, just broad patterns, not unexpected, but the largest outfall of the North Meridian workforce, for example, is the downtown Boise. Comparatively, few South Meridian workers make that trek to downtown, instead staying in Meridian or heading to the airport and micron areas in the larger flows. I will note the graphics in the ECR have some considerable notes on there. No big changes in family or household sizes. Household sizes have decreased by 0.04, and family size has increased by 0.05. A household can be a single person, roommates, basically anything, including a family, and a family are just those by marriage, blood, adoption. Housing is a reflection of permitting activity. In the last 10 years, the city has permitted more than 20,000 new housing units. In the same period, 33% of those were multifamily, and that has shifted the overall ratio of single-family and multifamily homes by 10%. The relationship is now 82% single-family and 18% multifamily. Here's a looking at housing expenditures. 30% is a sort of average for maximum percent of income that a household should spend in housing. That varies by research group or even HUD. HUD used to recommend a flat 30%, but other groups have found that metrics lower or rise based off of debt and other factors such as transportation costs. Nonetheless, as an average, 43% of renters are spending 30% or more on their income on housing. For homeowners, that is 22%.
That's very good.
In a 10-year period, the overall poverty rate has dropped 10%. There's no comparable data that includes more recent housing changes and inflation. So we'll have to see where that goes. However, the nice thing about a lot of this ACS-based data is that it's a 5-year rolling average. And so when you're comparing 5-year groups to 5-year groups, you don't see a lot of the spikes. It's more of a true trend over time. Basically here you can see that as you get more education, you're less likely to fall into poverty. That concludes staff presentation. There's obviously a lot more in the existing conditions report. I'm happy to discuss if desired. Staff request is to approve, is for Planning and Zoning Commission to recommend approval of this to the City Council. I'm otherwise happy to stand for questions or have a conversation.
All right, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Commissioner Grace, go right ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just not substantively, that was great, thank you. But is the existing conditions report, I'm thinking is probably required. It looks like an addendum to the comprehensive plan, and that's required in the statute you cited. I'm just trying to appreciate our authority. You're asking for us to approve it. I'm just making sure I understand in my mind what our authority is.
Commissioner Seal, Commissioner Grace. So yes, the existing conditions report is, the request tonight is a comprehensive plan text amendment. So you're modifying the comprehensive plan, which falls under your purview. The addendum also isn't, so not only are you modifying the comprehensive plan to adopt this, to essentially replace the old version of it, but this report itself addresses a number of the elements required under state law, which otherwise aren't addressed in the normal sort of forward-facing comprehensive plan that we usually deal with at public hearings. So this is something that you have to act on to be approved, and it's also important for us in our decision-making to be consistent with state code.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted clarification. I just wasn't sure what our scope was there, so I appreciate that. Thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Staff, I got another question here. I'm looking up at the labor force and unemployment, 10-year unemployment trend that you showed where it had the percentages there, but the average had a low, high, and an average. Yes, right there in the gray box. If I'm reading that right, does that mean that in an 8-month time period, we dropped unemployment by 9.1%?
No, Commissioner, I apologize. That's a typo.
Okay.
The actual chart in the, let me find it, page.
I mean, that'd be awesome, but that's
that's-
screaming.
So figure 2AE on page 228, that's from January 2012 to January 2022.
For which one?
For the gray box, that's on page 228.
Okay. What were those dates again? One more time, please.
January 2012 to January 2022. So 2 typos there.
Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Right ahead.
Ready for a motion?
We have to have public hearing.
Or public?
If there's no further questions, we can open it to public hearing.
I'm good.
Is there anybody signed up to testify?
Mr. Chair, there is not anybody signed up online or in-house.
Right? Anybody in chambers would like to come up and testify? Seeing none? Do we close the public hearing? No, nobody's here to testify, so we'll go ahead and I'll take a motion to close the public hearing on file number H 2022-0049.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing for file number H 2022-0049. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, motion carries. Any more discussion or a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Commissioner Lorcher.
I motion to after considering all staff and staff presentation, I move to recommend approval to City Council file number H 2022-0049 as presented in the staff report for the hearing date of August 18th, 2022, with no modifications.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve file number H 2022-0049 with no modifications. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, now we'll go ahead and open up file H 2022-0001 for the UDC text amendment. And the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Caleb Hood, Planning Division Manager. I will be presenting the 2022 UDC text amendment application on behalf not only of city staff, but of a UDC focus group that met, had a series of meetings over the last several months. Don't ask me exactly how long we've been meeting, probably 6 to 9 months, I would say, to put this round of proposed UDC text amendments together and get them before you. Bill Parsons usually presents that, and he does spearhead that group too and facilitate those meetings. He is unavailable tonight, so I'll cover, and I've been part of that group in the meetings, so I'm pretty comfortable with what I'll be proposing and presenting to you this evening. I'm not going to run through all the changes that entail this application. I will scroll through them. You have them in your packet. There are a few I want to highlight, a handful that I want to highlight, but please feel free to stop me as we're scrolling, or you've reviewed and you already want to talk about something or get some explanation on an interpretation, why the change, whatever the case may be. So I think I will just jump in then and again, kind of run through the highlights, if you will, of the proposed changes to our code. So the first one I want to highlight is actually on page 1. It's in the definition section. So we've had a couple, 3 projects over the last year or so where the projects were kind of skirting the definition of either a home occupation or a live work unit or even vertically integrated project. So what we've done by adding this definition is make it pretty clear the conditions that must exist to be, in this case, a live work residential project. And you'll actually see live work show up a couple of other times, like we're adding it to the schedule of use control. There's some other parts of our code as well, I believe, like the alternative compliance section and some parking standards and those types of things that also address this new definition and use that we're adding, again, to differentiate between the different types of integrated, so commercial and residential uses in one structure. So that's one I wanted to call to your attention. To that end, we're also amending the existing definition for vertically integrated residential project to just kind of clarify that. Again, this is not an accessory use at a home occupation, and it's not that live work definition that I just pointed out to you. I'm going to scroll to the next page. Sidewalks and parkways. I want to just talk about that a little bit. The Ada County Highway District is in the process of, both with their capital projects, but also through their development review and in their policy manual, getting away from bike lanes. So the bike lanes that you'll see below the curb on a lot of arterial streets today, generally 5 to 6 feet wide, striped on on the travel lanes, basically, again, in the street, basically, and then the curb gutter and the sidewalk usually is up a little bit higher. They're getting away from that cross section in the street. And instead, what they're going to do is a 10-foot wide, typically 10-foot wide, multi-use pathway. So that will be shared by cyclists and pedestrians, skateboarders, anyone else that non-motorized travel will be using that instead of being on the asphalt. It'll be a concrete. So what we've done here, and actually in another section or two noted there, is talk about, can be sidewalks or multi-use pathways when applicable, depending on if it's a local street, a collector street, an arterial street. But for the most part, on your major roadways, your arterial roadways and collector roadways, you'll start to see these multi-use pathways instead of the bike lanes.
Quick question on that.
Mhm.
On the non-motorized use, does that include electric?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask me that, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure that that's going to be in ACHD's policy manual. I know the Greenbelt in Boise has some allowance for that. I'm not sure on ACHD sidewalks. And again, these aren't sidewalks, but they serve a similar purpose. I've got to look into that and get back to you because I'm not 100% certain how that reads, and there may be that's changing in our society and in our county,
Yep.
And they may be amending that. So I'm not.
That's why I ask, because there's actually a person that rides an electric motorcycle on the sidewalk down Locust Grove every day. So,
Yeah.
and it's electric, so they take that as it's non-motorized, even though it's an electric motor. So there's, but obviously an electric scooter is going to leave a smaller footprint than that. So I
And
think we're probably rambling down the road where they're going to have to kind of decipher what an electric vehicle is versus, something else.
what I can let you know, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, in city code, we do actually address that, and it's kind of tiered. So on your local streets, 25, I believe the cutoff is 25 miles an hour or less. You can ride them in the street, basically. And then it's on higher speed facilities where there isn't a bike lane or other facilities, you're encouraged to ride up on the sidewalk. But again, I don't know if that's a countywide ACHD allowance or not. And we haven't had a contract with any, we call them shared vehicles provider for a while, whether it be bicycles or scooters or any other hybrid mode for that matter. But in city code, we do address that. And again, it's tiered. So on local streets, that's okay. And on the arterials, it's not. So.
Okay. I did have one question on the live work. Got a few applications come through where they're trying to integrate the live work on the same floor and basically have doors that come through and the concern has always been if they're going to do that, essentially that sets it up to where that can become a bedroom or a playroom or something along those lines. And it's not that that's their intention, but obviously that's something that could happen where you have a, row of live work that all of a sudden just becomes rentals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, there wasn't really a question in there, but again.
Yeah. I mean, is there going to be further discussion about that or maybe something to help guide us in that? Because seems like it's outside of our purview to try to enforce something like that. But at the same time, it is it's a question that needs to be asked.
Yeah. So a couple of different things certainly related in the same vein as your question there. So we are hoping that this provides you better guidance to know what we're approving initially.
Yeah.
The enforcement of that over time gets a little bit trickier. This code still applies, but we're not regularly doing inspections to see if it has been converted to a bedroom. If we get turned on to that, there's a code enforcement complaint, something like that, we can investigate it. But that gets a little bit trickier again as time goes on again, we don't have a regular role to go and inspect these structures to make sure they're used that way. But that being said, we have worked with our building codes and officials and fire marshals are in the loop. And so there is some of that oversight. So it's not like bait and switch and you can present something and then day one you're using it either for all residential or all commercial. There is some oversight in that, but there's probably still some gray areas, some holes. But I think with these cleanups, we're on a better path to seeing a true mix of uses on those projects where they're proposed and required.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Right ahead.
Staff, I have a question too concerning this 10-foot wide bikeways, that multi-use pathway. Is this going to be something though that will still operate like a shoulder, or will it be something that'll be an elevated place, or will it be something that'll be curbed off? Is it something that'll be distance between like a roadway and then you'll have some green space or something? Or can you explain just a little bit more about that? please?
Sure. Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Wheeler. So that's kind of a case by case, depending on how much right of way is there and any power poles, fire hydrants, trees, other things that may be in the way. But as for the most part, the cross section will be your travel lanes for the roadway, and then a 12-inch gutter, and then a curb. And then when possible, it will even be detached or striped. Sometimes they'll use the stamped concrete that's colored as kind of to detach it from the curb, if you will. We're really pushing for even there to be about a minimum of 4 foot, 6 and 8 is great of a detached, doesn't have to be sod or turf, but some landscape material in there. And then this 10-foot wide multi-use pathway. Again, sometimes that will, just because it gets constrained, have to come back and pull back towards the curb and even be attached. May even get, in certain circumstances, have to go down to like 7 or 8 feet in some circumstances. But for the most part, that's the ideal cross section, is detached from the curb, 10 feet wide, up above the center line and the travel lanes.
Okay. One of the other things I just want to speak on, just 2 things here, just real quickly, just for input purposes. One is when it comes down to the electric bicycles, electric vehicles on that side that Chairman, you were talking about that. I know that I think it's the Department of Interior passed something back in 2019 that stated that anything that was under 750 watts, which is about 1 horsepower, would be considered a non-motorized vehicle for their access into their departments of lands and the BLM land. And it sounds like there might be something similar to way that our code lines up a little bit, maybe would have some influence on that. So that might give some sort of guidance as you guys kind of tighten up a little bit about what might be seen. They also had like a limit on how fast that those vehicles can go. And it was somewhere right around that 20, I want to say it was 25 miles or less, or 20 miles and less, where there was actually a speed limit on that side of it. If it went faster than that, or if it was on 1,000 watt, which would make it 1 1/4 horsepower, even though it was electric vehicle, it was considered motorized and was not allowed, and those kind of things. So just something as a reference for in the future. The other thing is that I just want to encourage to have some sort of striping or marking, because this is going to be off the normal path from a roadway. And if someone's to fall down, or if someone's to get injured, or whatever the case is, to have some sort of a marker to say, hey, instead of say, by mile post such and such, maybe to say that, hey, I'm at, this marker point off of Eagle Road, or this marker point off the Reidenbach Canal, or whatever that case is. And that way for EMT services, or for whatever, that can be just called in on something like that. I think that might be something to do for just safety purposes. I know everybody's got a phone and they can share their locations and things of that nature, but sometimes in the frantic of it all, to be able to just point and say, hey, you're at 6.3 or whatever the case is, and whatever that might look like, whether it be a stripe on the road or on the pathway, or whether it be a small little post however often, that's just something to consider,
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I appreciate those comments. I will share those with ACHD. Again, these are under the jurisdiction of ACHD, but I think those are both good comments and points, and I'll look into that and reply to the rest of the commission on what currently the policy talks about with that. Just so you know, I mean, it is still relatively new at ACHD. They're still trying to figure out, do they stripe even a center line down the middle of this to drive on the right, you can pass on the left, but basically the right hand stay to the right. Two-way traffic, one-way traffic. How does that work? Crossings of roadways, because this is so wide. How do you're bringing them behind the first car? So there's a lot going on here that they're trying to figure out and standardize. So I will share those comments, look into that, and then follow up again with an email to the commission on some of your answers. Some of it may not be an answer just yet, but something for them to consider.
Thank you.
Caleb, are most of these amendments applying to that 10-way path as it relates to ACHD and the roadways, and not really kind of the ditches and canals and things like that, or is it?
Correct. Yeah. So I think we do have is it right here? If you look at the 11305 part, the multi-use pathway constructed in accord with the Ada County Highway District. So most of this is the intent. It doesn't change our multi-use pathway and the pathway network system and our cross section for those.
Mhm.
So maybe even some of the comments that Commissioner Wheeler had, I can share with our Parks Department for those off-street multi-use pathway segments too. Because a lot of times Locust Grove, okay, I know where Locust Grove, but if I'm on the Bud Porter and I'm in between Meridian and Linder, having a mile marker or something, some identifiable mile marker or some post or something that you can talk to EMS about where you're at. I think those are good comments for both cases. But again, Mr. Chair, primarily to accommodate ACHD's change towards multi-use pathways in lieu of bike lanes and doing a combined sidewalk and bike lane.
Mr. Chair. One other quick thing, staff, I would encourage that those markers actually not be mile, but they would be closer than that because they're pedestrian
Yep.
access and stuff. That'd be my only suggestion on that.
Okay, I'm gonna keep scrolling a little bit, but again, if you see anything you want clarification on or to talk about. Next one I had down to talk about is one that comes up, I think, with about every multifamily project, and that's parking. So first, I'll just start by saying we aren't proposing any changes to the guest space requirement. So it'd still be 1 per 10. That seems to be working pretty well, although it's still a relatively new standard in and of itself. So we haven't seen a whole bunch of projects come online yet that have built out with that requirement. So this was a pretty big topic of a conversation. And in fact, I've got a kind of option 2 for you to consider. What we ended up landing on, and I don't think there's anybody opposed to this on that focus group. But there was some conversation. Is this the best answer? It's a good answer, but there may be a couple of dissenting opinions, if you want to say that thinks that option 2 is better. And I'll get to that here in just a second. It's actually pretty easy that this change that we came up with, it is just essentially taking the 3-bedroom units where we required 2-car parks and said, if you have 3 bedrooms, you need 3-car parks for multifamily. We added this note as well that clarifies that any amenity within that multifamily project is not subject to the parking requirements, basically. We've had some inconsistencies on the square footage of a fitness center needing to provide parking stalls with the 1 per 500 square feet, basically. So some of these that have them integrated, just clarifying that. They can certainly provide them, and a lot of them do, but it's not a requirement of code. The option B for that, I think I have it pulled up here. Yeah, pretty simple. So what this does, it just says 2 per. So on average, you get some 1 bedrooms, you get some 3 bedrooms. There's a lot of 2 bedrooms, 2 per, easy math. How many units do you have? 40. Okay, 80 parking stalls. I can do that math pretty quick. How many are 1 bedroom? How many are 3 bedroom? Okay, and so that was the other thing. And if memory serves, I think some of this, I think the city of Boise, don't quote me on that, but that's what I'm recalling from some of the UDC focus group discussion. This is where they're going with some of that. Irregardless, studio to 4+ bedrooms, 2 per. And again, on average, that seems to work out okay. So this was not the majority vote or recommendation, but it was one that had some momentum and no one was totally opposed to it either. Again, primarily for why I mentioned this is pretty easy to calculate. So something to consider. And I'm kind of on the fence myself. I kind of like that. And I kind of tend to agree. And almost everything's usually in the 1 to 2. Yeah, you get some 3 bedrooms. But that's probably going to be, on average about the same number. And it's really easy to do the math. So, and that would be the same then for the vertically integrated projects too. We are looking at bumping those up. Right now it is, once Meridian really has an urban core or some of these areas that have additional transportation options and things like that, I think we could probably go back to something, excuse me, that like what's currently on the books, which is just 1 per dwelling unit, irregardless of how many bedrooms. But they are more, excuse me, most of the families or the units are occupied by multiple cars. And so when you have 2 or more bedrooms. They're essentially a multifamily project, not a vertically integrated project, I guess is another way to say it. So that is something we're proposing, is to step up the amount of parking stalls required for vertically integrated.
Quick question on the one just above that for the parking standards, the parking
Mhm.
stall sizes. Does that also apply to Old Town and I mean essentially everywhere?
So no, and Mr. Chair, if I can just clarify the one above it, I just closed the screen or minimized.
Oh,
it.
sorry.
Does this one work? You don't want me to go back to the other one?
Just the 11.3C 5A6, just
3C.
right above where we're talking about here. Just says the design for standard vehicles.
So this one actually was at the request of our city council. And if you read it, it's not actually a requirement. It just says that they should be designed for standard and or oversized vehicles. So the intent here is to get the design professional to think about that. Are we likely to have a landscaper with a dually, here? Should we accommodate and designate some of these stalls for that? So we as staff are not recommending that we require that. Let's say one out of every 20 needs to be for an oversized Idaho truck. But it is something where, again, we want the design professionals to think about it. Hey, you know what? Yeah, we probably shouldn't design everything for a compact type vehicle, because this is Idaho and people do like their trucks. So that would apply everywhere, but it's not a standard.
After dropping my son off at the downtown Y for a week for a camp,
Mhm.
I appreciate this new thing. So, because all the stalls down there, my wife has a compact SUV that I drove down there. And it was horrible. They could not get out of the doors.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Lorcher, go ahead.
So with these standards that you're suggesting here for the standard vehicles and the multifamily housing developments. So this goes to city council for recommendation, then it's adopted, correct?
Mhm.
So does it go effective immediately? Any application that comes in, they start following these standards of, you're suggesting 2 spaces per unit regardless of the size?
So a couple of things, just to clarify, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lorcher. So these would go into effect after, so yes, the council will act on them. The ordinance will be updated and there'll be an effective date. Anything submitted to us prior to that effective date is, legal's gonna glare at me, grandfathered in. So they're under, someone submits a code amendment, even the day verbally council approves this, they still go through our process under the old code, if you will. Anything we accept after the effective date of this then has to follow these standards. So you will see some projects probably for the next 3 or 4 months that are going to be, you're using the old code or our current code. Did I catch all of your questions in there? There were a couple, 3 in there, right? I think I drove. Okay.
Commissioner Grace, do you have something?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So you described what we're looking at, and then you described an option B, and I just want to
Yes.
make sure I understand it in my own mind. So what I'm looking at is the second column would be the size of the unit, and the third column is what you're suggesting you have for parking spaces there. The obvious question in my mind is, what does 1.5 mean? But when you, is that a 1-bedroom?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Grace. I didn't put the heading on this. So you're right. This is number of bedrooms. So a studio, 1 bedroom. This, under our old code, current code, 2 and 3 bedrooms were lumped here. What we're doing is taking the 3 bedrooms and we're lumping it with 3 and 4 bedrooms and more to say, you know what, at 3 bedrooms, you really need 3 car parks. Back to your other question. And I thank you for bringing that up because I think Commissioner Lorcher mentioned the 2 car parks per, that's option B. That is not the proposed. That's not option A, that's option B. If you want to make it option A to the council, that is certainly within your purview, but what the UDC focus group recommended is what you see on the screen. So 1.5 is an average. You don't usually have just one bedroom. You're going to have 2, 3, 4, and then we'd round up. So if you had an odd number, we'd round up to the next highest.
And then is it fair to say that I'm calling it option A, but the one that I'm looking at provides a little more parking than option B?
You know,
Because you said the numbers were pretty
Sure,
close,
sure
I
is.
think.
Yeah, I think it's going to average out over time. The exercise I did not do is go to count how many multifamily units had 1, 2, and 3, and then say, okay, if we would use the old, this 2 per, what would we have ended up with a car parking requirement? I did not do that. Just anecdotally, I'm saying it's going to be real close because 90% of your apartment buildings are probably 1 and 2 bedrooms. You get some studios and you get some 3s. Most of them are right in there where we would require 2 car parks anyways. And you have some on the high side and some on the low side. So overall, it kind of just averages out to around 2. But again, I did not go through the exercise to say if we had a requirement of 2, would we have gotten more parking or less parking? Because I don't know how many bedrooms are in all the apartments in Meridian.
Just to follow up, Mr. And I was going to ask you at the end, Caleb, but since you kind of brought it up, who made up that focus group?
Good question. It's made up of architects, engineers, developers. We have 1 member of the citizen group, if you will, that asked to be part of that as well. But they really are professionals that work in our code and kind of know the code and what works. Staff, we have members of our legal team. Police is here this evening. They sit on that fire. So it's, I can read you the names if you'd like.
No, I just wanted to get a kind of
Yeah.
a gauge of who was on it. And it sounds like, what I presumed was that some deference needs to go to their deliberations and their expertise. So sounds like they wrung their hands on this one. I just wanted to give it the same attention. That's all.
And again, this one, parking in particular, got quite a bit of time on our docket. We spent quite a bit of time talking about this.
Thank you for that.
All right, I'm gonna move on then. This one, just to call to your attention, I think you don't get too many of these, but we are seeing more and more requests for private streets in the R2, R4, and R8 district, which they're currently prohibited in. Just because we do have a street frontage requirement per lot on public street frontage. So we are opening that up to allowing public or private streets, in the R2, R4, R8 district. I want to say though, the purpose statement is not changing. We are not really trying to encourage many more private streets because over time they can be a burden on those homeowners when it comes to maintenance of those things, but we're open to it. So the door is opened a little bit more of a crack in the door, if you will. But as staff, we really want to see, for connectivity reasons and long-term maintenance reasons, we still generally are pushing for public streets, but private gated communities in an R2 and R4 are appropriate from time to time. So this does allow that to occur. Next one, I wanted to just quickly let you know, again, just a change kind of in our society. We are adding to the table of potential amenities when you have to provide open space and amenities in subdivisions, charging stations for electric vehicles. Installed with the business center, clubhouse, or fitness facility. So this wouldn't be a standalone one in this case. This would be, the parking for the clubhouse. You have a couple of charging stations for EVs. So that would be a couple of points. So back to parking again. So drinking establishments, we did probably 3 or 4 years ago, we amended our code. Our general requirement for car parks for commercial enterprise is 1 per 500 square feet. Restaurants and industrial buildings and our downtown all currently have different standards. We believe that drinking establishments function more like a restaurant, and parking usually can be a concern. So 1 per 500 square feet hasn't worked at some of our bars. And so it sounds kind of weird to require more car parking for people that are going to the bar, but we have had problems where initially a retail business goes in and then a drinking establishment takes over that space and there's not enough parking because it was meant for the yarn shop. And now it's a restaurant bar and there's 4 times the traffic and it's spilling out into the adjacent neighborhoods. So when a drinking establishment goes in, we are going to apply that 1 per 250 square feet. So doubling the car park requirement for drinking establishments. Almost done. There's the secondary dwelling. Again, this one is something that's gotten some press recently, well, over the past year with the housing prices and inflation and all those other things. We are really trying to encourage and allow maybe more accessory dwelling units, otherwise known as, granny flats or mother-in-law's quarters, those types of things on your property. So we've added some, kind of loosened some of the restrictions on an ADU or accessory dwelling unit standards. So where they can be placed on the lot, we are allowing up to have 2 bedrooms. So maybe they can, and a little bit larger if people want to make them a little bit bigger and nicer. That isn't a minimum, it's a maximum. So just a couple of changes that we think may allow a few more to be constructed in Meridian, where some have said, it's not worth the effort. If it can only be 700 square feet in 1 bedroom, I'm not interested. Probably I'll just disclose, there may be more to come on this as well. So as we talk more about accessory dwelling units and what we can do about attainable housing in our code, there may be more coming. We're kind of also keeping an eye on what other cities are doing in our area and even across the nation.
I can say, I see that the manufactured or mobile homes where tiny homes
Mhm.
kind of fit into that. So
Mhm.
they're becoming wildly popular. So I
Yes.
wonder how that's going to fit into the community. Or
And then, yes, mobile homes, tiny homes, RVs, defining them and trying to figure out how that all works. So like I said, probably more to come on not just accessory dwelling units, but what we do with structures, mobile structures, those types of things in the near future, probably.
Mr. Chair.
yes, go ahead.
Caleb, can you go back, to that section there? I'm reading about the garage section there on that for the under parking under E.
Yep.
It looks like the, what's the right term for it? Accessory dwelling unit, is that what it's called?
Mhm.
Okay, so then under the accessory dwelling unit there under E, it looks like they do not need to have, or they are not allowed to have a garage on that.
No, we do require a parking for the ADU. That is one of the concerns we get from adjacent neighbors when there
Okay.
isn't parking provided, because this is a standalone dwelling for a new family. It can be a family member, but this is a separate standalone dwelling. And so they do need to provide required parking, yes.
So that means that they could, and because garages are not part of the square footage, they could have a 900 square foot unit and then also have a 900 square foot 3-car garage.
There's potential. I will say there's not a whole lot of lots in Meridian where you can fit that on, but yes, in theory, you could do that.
Okay. Hmm.
I will say it's good that there's some work done on this because I think this is coming at us quickly.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Larcher, go ahead.
I guess my only comment was that if mobile homes and specifically manufactured homes, it's very cost prohibitive for most families in Meridian to be able to have a separate dwelling. So you're requiring that it has a foundation and that it has, you put all the plumbing in and it connects to sewer and all of those things currently.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, Commissioner Larcher, there's a lot to this topic, so I don't know how deep you want to go.
I mean, just in
But
general.
yes, what you just said as a general synopsis is correct. To be a dwelling unit, must be on a foundation, must be connected to sewer and water. The other thing that comes into play there is most of our zoning in the city is R2, R4, R8, single family residential. When you bring another dwelling, even if you put it on a foundation and hook it up to sewer and water, that's 2 on a lot. So it's prohibited not only by definition, if it's on wheels, it's mobile right now. And by definition, it's a recreational vehicle. So you either license it and register it through the state, right, as a vehicle, or it's a dwelling and you go through our building department and get it certified as such. You got to be one or the other and you can't be both simultaneously. So again, there's a lot there, but you got zoning codes and definitions and building codes and definitions that all kind of intermingle. So yes, we're exploring that and recognize that, yes, it's not super cost efficient to require, again, a foundation, like you stated, and hook up to sewer and water. But if you're going to be a dwelling, that is what's required. Your single family lot was only sized and you're only paying for the electric and the garbage and for one family, not 2 or 3 or 4 and all that. So, but we get it. Times change and but there's a lot that goes into that when you start to say, okay, well, it's not a JCO, it's a home. Well, what are the differences? What are the similarities? How is that different from my brick and mortar home that's right there? So anyways, we'll be back and be talking about that more, I'm sure, here in the future.
Mr. Chair, I'm sure most R8s wouldn't be able to have, like you said, wouldn't have the space for it, but R2s and possibly R4s would.
There are some, absolutely. And that's why, we're opening this up, and even for, back to your comment about a tiny home, depending on how we define that. Again, even meeting a minimum 5-foot setback, things like that, there are lots where you can do that. So again, we're developing a list of pros and cons and how that could work. And again, just back to the parking question or comment, there's real impacts to existing neighborhoods too. So we've got to factor that in. Yes. Be empathetic to some of those that, want to live or need to live in something like that, but also realize that there's a neighborhood that others have bought into that weren't expecting maybe to see people living out of tiny homes and clogging up the streets with more cars. So it's a fun one. Moving on, I don't know that I have anything else highlighted. I will scroll through. Yeah, again, just some more things on vertically integrated, live work. We did talk a little bit about some of these where there's concurrent applications for CUPs and development agreement modifications and with council. And so some of those have been are proposed to be amended to make that process hopefully work a little bit smoother. I think that's pretty much it. The rest of these are pretty administrative changes. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll send for any other questions you want to double back or any more comments you have on.
I've just real quick, I did the pathway stuff here recently. There was just a presentation for Parks and Recs that they did on that on the, what was the organization?
ULI.
ULI did that. And as part of that, one of the, can't say complaints, but one of the concerns that was brought up by folks was in planning out the pathway system that because it is going to be so integrated with the irrigation systems that it's almost impossible for them to put any kind of shrubbery, trees, or anything like that in with that. So they're reluctant to do it because they get basically they're giving up some land to do it and they get nothing for it. So essentially it's not counted as an amenity when they do that. So is there, hopefully there's some discussion on that, because I think that the pathway system here, to me, it's, I mean, I ride a bike a lot, so that's one thing, but I also spend a lot of time riding my bike in areas where they've made it a priority, especially in the Eagle area. And what I've seen happen with that is not only are they protecting some of their farmland, historical lands and things like that, it's been integrated in with pathways because the people that own that land are more than open to having, pathways and things like that. They don't want cars, they don't want houses and things like that. So they've integrated that into their communities, where now not only do you have the landowners, which are oftentimes because they have large tracts of land, a minority in the proceedings, now you have a different group that's out there and kind of swinging the bat for them, as I would say, to kind of keep that land as it is or to develop it differently to kind of keep that, more rural appeal to it. So I guess coming a long ways around to hopefully there's more discussions on how to kind of give more credit for pathways, especially interconnecting pathways to anybody that's willing to do them, and hopefully eliminate some of the, the requirements to try and provide trees and things like that. And there was actually, there's a section that we passed over for the riparian areas, try to integrate some of that into it. into the pathways portion of it to where anything that is natural, it was there before, essentially the building started to happen. If that's left alone and the pathway is part of that, that's also a good integration into it as well. And then there was also some stuff in here as far as was it low water or not water abatement, but it was, I think on page 1 or page 2, it was. I think it was up further than that. I can't remember what it was called off the top of my head. Yeah, water conserving design. Is that something that's going to be given credit as far as an amenity, or is that just something it's just in here for definition?
Mr. Chair, so there is some credit. I don't know how you want to define credit, I guess, but yes, you can count it. It is eligible. You don't get like a bonus or anything like that for doing water conserving design, but you can see some of the standards that would qualify you, going from kind of a non-traditional turf design when you use these xeriscape principles. So it's kind of in lieu. So yeah, again, credit, you don't get an extra pat on the back or anything necessarily. We may go there where we encourage it by saying, hey, you can provide less if you do it this way. We haven't gone there just yet. So I hope that answers your question. But this is another thing that's evolving in our world these days as water becomes more and more precious and we need to conserve it. We are moving towards highlighting these things and saying, hey, we do have options to do it this way. And would encourage you to come up with these innovative designs that, they're not as green, but they're a little more friendly.
Right. Well, and they're more cost effective. I mean, you live in a
Long-term.
subdivision that has acres and acres of grass to mow. Or if they could put something in more to this kind of standard, it would actually in the long run save money. And a lot of this would be native, so it's going to grow here anyway.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to prevent it from growing out of the ground, why don't we try to make it grow out of the ground? But okay, that was the only question I had. Commissioner Grace, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, can we just return to that secondary dwelling conversation? Is that, I'm sure it is, but is that term, it says down below in paragraph H, what is not, but I'm wondering if that term is defined, and I'm sure it is probably somewhere, and if it's defined to require that secondary dwelling to be affixed to the land.
Correct. Yeah. And that's what I was kind of alluding to in
Okay.
our definition of dwelling. So there's more to it than this, but essentially it has to be on a foundation. It has to be hooked up to sewer and water. It also has to have a kitchen. It also has to have a bathroom, and it has to have, can be a studio, but living quarters. So to be a dwelling, you have to check all those boxes. You can't be, so like a hotel is not a dwelling because it doesn't check some of those boxes and have a garage. So that's another thing for a dwelling. You can have a multifamily dwelling that has carport, but there's still parking associated with it. So yes, there's multiple definitions you look at and go, okay, are you a dwelling? Are you, again, a mobile unit? Are you a recreational vehicle? And so on and so forth. So I don't know if that
Yeah, it
helps or
does.
not.
And
There's
you
more
did-
to it than this.
You did say it had to be on a foundation. So my apologies, but I just know there's different types of this modulars, and they're making living units out of containers now. And so our requirement is that it has to be on a foundation.
Correct.
Okay.
And just to take that again down in a little further into the weeds, mobile homes even we define as, I think they have to be manufactured before 1972 or 3 or 4, something like that. So we even define it like these are the old school single wide, double wides. Those are, again, I'll use the term grandfathered. Those are a separate thing. There's a new standard, and I can't remember off the top of my head, national standard for energy efficiency and all those manufactured homes that are different standards. So there's just this array of what can be, someone could live in, but it may not be a dwelling.
It's June 15th, 1975, when
75. Okay.
HUD started taking over regulation.
Somewhere in there. Yeah. Early mid 70s. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Wheeler, go ahead.
Caleb, it's me again.
Hi.
Have another question for you, and I think it kind of goes up if we can go to the landscaping and also the parking requirements. So table 11 3C 6, and also kind of seeing how that kind of coincides or kind of comes in with where was that at? The landscaping buffers that were under 11 3B 7C and things like that. I'll let you know what's kind of going on in my mind and seeing if there's anything in the code that can address this specifically. Also want to know if this is something that we can address here with this motion of this updated with the code, or if it's something that just has to wait and be taken care of differently. But I'll let you, here's a scenario that's in my head. Okay. So on these major mile streets that we have, or half mile streets where we have residential subdivisions that have a direct turn off into them, there's hundreds of these around the valley, right? In Meridian. Sometimes in order to just make it a little more pleasant to come into the subdivision, there's some sort of landscaping island that comes there, right? That just kind of opens it up. So that way you're just not pulling into a 2-lane, 3-lane road straight away. I sometimes those houses though, that are next to where those islands are at, will also park their vehicles in that driveway coming in, which then narrows the access down significantly. And to me, I find it actually an emergency issue. I find it a big safety issue, because if there's a fire, this is the main access in to get to a house that's maybe 1 or 2, quarter mile in, but they can't because now they have a vehicle that's parked there, or they have to maneuver around it, or they have to figure out a way to get there, or whatever the case is, right? And time is of the essence. Is there anything that's in here that says something along that there can be a distance between these islands that are in, I'm like, once again, I'm getting really specific here, I understand, but I didn't know if there's anything addressed, like, 100 feet what past, that's where the first parking can happen, or no parking within 50 feet of this. I mean, just, these are the kinds of thoughts that are going through my head.
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, yeah, good concern and question. So there's nothing in the UDC that addresses what you're describing. However, there are at least 2, if not 3 other sections of other code that do address that. So the fire marshal will require, so those, excuse me, the splitter islands, the entryway features, one side of those has to be at least 20 feet wide so that they can declare it a travel lane. Usually it's just one side. Sometimes they will make them both 20 feet wide. But if you look, usually the exiting one is a little, because they have a dedicated right turn or a left through or something like that. But the entrance one is usually a little bit narrower than the entrance off of the arterial into the subdivision is usually narrower. But our fire code will require that any street, and that would even include that area between the island and the curb, be at least 20 feet. Used to be that the fire marshal would require that to be painted red and signed no parking. It's not very pretty. So it's still the code, but they've gotten away from the painting the curb, and a lot of times even the signage. But if there's an issue, we can have, it's still the code. It's just not signed that you can't park here. So if there's an issue somewhere, let me know, let the fire marshal know. We can go out there and either put a sign, and ACHD also. So there's state code is the one I'm not positive about. There may be something in state code, because I know there's sections of state code that talk about how close to like a stop sign you can park and things like that. So in an intersection. So kind of depending on the exact situation and what violation there may be, you may be looking at 3 different sections of code, but it's not the UDC, just to tell you. And just to be quite frank with you, it's not the right place to put something like that. That's more in our vehicles and motors and Title 7 or 8 that we have of city code than in the UDC. But it's covered other places. I think it's really enforcement. So if someone's violating that and parking where they shouldn't be, we have police officers and fire marshals and that can look into that.
Perfect. That's what I wanted to know. That's perfect. Thank you, Caleb.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Caleb. Appreciate the presentation. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed up to testify?
Mr. Chair, we have no one signed up online or in person.
Anybody in chambers want to come up? No? Seeing none. Can I get a motion to close the public hearing for file number H 2022-0001?
Mr. Chairman, so moved.
Second.
It's been, actually, let me go back and do this again. I notice right now it's file number ZOA -2022-0001.
Chairman, I move to close public testimony.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to close public testimony for file number ZOA 2022-0001. All in favor, say aye.
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 No nays, motion passes. Okay. Any further discussion, or have we beat up on Caleb enough? Bring it on, right?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I'm sorry I'm talking so much tonight. I don't know what happened. So thank you though for listening. But my only thought is on those dwellings with those standalone units, those secondary auxiliary units, is to maybe have something in there that talks about them. Do we want to add something that says something tiny homes too, based upon kind of what you're thinking?
I mean, considering the price of housing, and I have mixed feelings about all of it. I do agree with what Caleb alluded to, which was, I mean, you're gonna have people in subdivisions that aren't necessarily expecting something to pop up behind their house. You know, I mean, if my neighbor built something like that in their backyard, I would kind of question whether or not that's viable or not. That said, I also have a son who's in his mid-20s that's trying to buy a house, and every time he thinks he has enough saved up to buy a house, you know, the finish line moves on him. So, you know, I'm interested to see where this goes, honestly. And I think we are going to see probably a lot more people that want to try to furnish their, you know, essentially their properties this way. And not just in a, you know, an acre or 5 acres, you know. I mean, there's a row of houses down 10 Mile that are on 1 to 5 acre lots that have mother-in-law quarters. So almost bought one early 2000s myself. So I think that's going to move more into the rural areas just because of the cost of housing. And I mean, some of the demographics we saw earlier, as far as what was the amount of people paying more than 30% for rent was like, had grown by 40%. I mean, it's a big number. So I just think the affordability of housing is it's starting to become out of reach for a lot of people. So
Understood.
I'm interested to see where this goes and to see what we start to allow and what the public will allow, honestly. You know, because there are good ways to do this and bad ways to do this, and everybody has a different opinion about what's good and bad about it. So I'm more interested to see where it goes than to try and put wording into it.
Okay. One of the only things that I was thinking about was on that garage side of things. My only caution or my only thoughts on it, and I'm just kind of opening this up here for commission here to just kind of give me maybe some thoughts on it or their input on it, is you could have somebody go ahead and build like a 500, 600 square foot detached, right, auxiliary secondary dwelling, and then go ahead and build a 900 or 1200 square foot garage on top of it. And so far that would be okay. And I think that's just a bit disproportionate, not what this is supposed to be kind of trying to help with. And so my only thought is maybe to have some wording in there that says, you know, a limit or a percentage of the dwelling being allotted for a garage unit. So in other words, somebody would say, okay, you can go up to 50% of the size of the dwelling, up to a maximum of, you know, 800 square feet or whatever, 900 square feet, because that's a 3-car garage. Or we say, no, a garage should only be limited because it is a secondary up to 600 square feet, which is a 2-car garage size. But those are just my thoughts that initially come to me just first time through. I don't know what the rest of the commission thinks.
So, Mr. Chair, to your first point, and I guess that's why I asked the question about the definition of a secondary dwelling unit. It's my understanding that a tiny home is is a structure on a foundation built to the IRC. So it would be allowed if that was your concern. It would be allowed under that definition. So if that, I didn't know if that was okay with you or not, but I was okay with that.
With it being a very large, having like a large shop.
No, just to your
garage?
first point about the tiny home.
Oh, the tiny, oh, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And that's how I understood it.
I'm okay with the tiny homes too.
Yeah, unless staff corrects me.
So you left the window there, or I interrupted, I don't know, but
Right ahead.
and I'm not trying to correct you, but I do want to clarify. So tiny home can be, this is where it gets confusing, even in the words we use, right? Can be a small dwelling. Where it becomes I don't want to call it a problem, but where it's not a dwelling in Meridian is when it's not on a foundation. So I don't know if you guys are even talking about the same thing. Because when I hear tiny home, a lot of people in their mind think mobile, it's on wheels, it's on a trailer, it's got a hitch and I can move it. So I don't know if you're talking IRC, and that's what I'm saying. Now we're under our building codes. It's foundation, hook up to sewer and water versus
Perfect.
mobile. So that just,
I don't want it on wheels either. I like the tiny, I just know that that's just kind of a,
small dwelling is different than tiny home to a lot of people.
Right. And that's what I was more alluding to is, I mean, the kind of the tiny home, there's a lot of people that have transitioned to this kind of tiny home, and it is, generally speaking, it's a homemade trailer type of dwelling. So not that you couldn't put something like that on a foundation and plummet electrical and all that stuff. It's just, as we go down this path, I just see that becoming more available to where, it used to be that, you'd push baby bird out of the nest, and now, there's nowhere for them to go. So, I mean, they can't afford to stay here anymore. So I just see that this has probably become something that more people consider as we go down that path. I mean, I'm fortunate to where my son can afford to live in the area still, but he can't afford to buy. So as those options become less and less, then I can see people, myself included, being more open to something like that.
Agreed.
Just as a citizen, not as a, commissioner or anything, but that's my personal thoughts on it.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Not to get in the middle of your guys' deliberation too much, I've already inserted myself, but I do just want to let you know, I mean, council is also talking about this. So I think, and they're trying to look at it again comprehensively. I appreciate the sentiment talking about that here and now. I don't want to knee jerk, and don't take that the wrong way, but there are implications to words and making changes now that just trickle down, and you got to change a whole bunch of stuff. So what I was going to say mainly is to let you know, there is discussions at council. I think it's going to be on the council workshop agenda coming up in the next few weeks again. And what I was going to offer, so Councilwoman Perot, who used to be on the Planning and Zoning Commission, is kind of volunteered to spearhead that effort and is looking to potentially put together a task force working group that is going to try to tackle this for our community. So I'm not asking for volunteers now, but I will let her know of this conversation, that maybe one or two of you may be good to serve on that, since there's at least interest from a few of you. And she may reach out. So I don't want you to think that nothing's going on, although the changes you see are pretty minor at this point. We are evaluating this to see if there's longer term, broader solutions to the attainable housing issues we're facing right now.
Cool.
Right. And given that really what's before us is, in terms of strike through and underline, are just some of those minor things, I might heed that advice and wait for the people who are probably smarter than me to figure that out.
very good. Very good. Yeah. Like I said, I just wanted a discussion on it and see what you guys thought. So.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I appreciate the fact that we are having this much discussion on this. So a lot of times this is very, I mean, a lot of the stuff in here is more just for cleanup and things like that, but where we're moving forward into a new era, basically. This stuff really starts to have teeth, if you will. So I'm glad we're having a lot of conversation on it. It's a good conversation. With that, We have closed the public hearing, so if anybody wants to make a motion, I'm more than ready to listen.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Lorcher, go ahead.
after considering all staff comments, I move to recommend approval to the city council file number ZOA 2022-0001 as presented on the hearing date of August 18th, 2022 with no modification.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve file number ZOA 2022-0001, no modifications. All in favor, say aye.
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 No opposed, so motion carries. And with that, I will take one more motion.
Mr. Chair, a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to that we adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, motion carries. Thank you all very much.